We have noticed a great change in the students' behaviour. They feel a lot more supported. We do check-ins Monday, Wednesday, Friday every morning, first thing as a support faculty. Here they feel that they belong and they're cared for. We can resolve issues a lot quicker and students feel like they've been heard and valued.
We initially reached out to Real Schools because we wanted to address a couple of concerns within our school around consistency. Our teachers could be more consistent. They try very, very hard, but we're all selling a different message, whereas now we're all selling the same message. And I find that that has seen great value in the first 6 months.
Before this whole new script that the teachers sort of have been given, I think that students weren't really actually listening to what the teachers were saying, but I think now students are realising that they really should be paying attention and that the teachers are doing it for their own good.
The teachers have changed a lot. I feel like with Real Schools helping them, they've become more consistent and there's more of a format on how they deal with students and help them into the class, and the lessons flow a lot smoother.
The videos that Cassie produced for us were short and sharp and concise. They were to the point that allowed staff to understand what's being said, how they can implement things, and then what they could expect as an outcome from using her key points.
They used terminology that we had already implemented already. She read the room and she understood what we were doing, and she was able to then develop that in video form for us that we were able to then pick up and then run with really easily.
We constantly enjoy when she comes to visit. She's very professional, but the fact that she has all that knowledge from being there as a past principal, it really assists us because she knows what we feel like. On the ground running, she knows exactly how we feel, so that really assists with everything.
The interactions with Cassie from day one has been nothing but professional, and the staff really appreciate all the time that she gives to us. Staff have come on board so quickly with this process with Real Schools because they see the value that it adds to our school in achieving success for not only staff but also for our students and the community.
I think what I've seen is a light bulb moment with our teachers, and they're talking about how they've positive primed their children. They've talked about the benefits of circle time and seen the results of it, and they know that change doesn't happen overnight, but they're seeing the gradual shift in the environment and the feel in their class, and they're loving that.
When you have these small positive steps or strategies that we've learnt through Real Schools and with Simon, we are seeing now a sort of collective where kids are feeling much more comfortable and open, and if they're not having a good day, I feel like they can open up and talk to us, and as a whole we're kind of moving in this really positive direction, which I think is really exciting.
I love that we've now got a structure that helps us with resolving conflicts, so we're not emotionally involved anymore. It's just like this process that we go through with the kids, and I see a lot more clarity around it as well, and we're moving forward, which is really great.
I think bringing Real Schools on, especially this year now that we're actually at school, has been so beneficial for the staff and for the students to know there's consistency, there's expectations, and we're just trying to be the best that we can be for our students.
I find those kids that were difficult to sort of connect with and were reluctant to share feel a lot more comfortable. I think we now have a deeper connection with the students and they feel that. I think we've been able to show a different sort of empathy, which has been huge for them.
Simon was friendly and energised and just gave us a whole rundown, and for me a great picture of what Real Schools could look like at Richmond Primary School.
One of the big things I've noticed with it is that the kids are very much versed in talking about how they're feeling about things. If something goes wrong in the playground, the kids are very good at telling each other how it made them feel, and I think that's really good from the kids' point of view, that they can see the impact they've had so they know that they can fix things.
The discussions that are coming up even in staff meetings or leadership meetings or with the students, we're questioning all the time why we're doing things certain ways so that we can make it better, and that has really grown, and staff and students have grown in confidence in that over the last few years, and they know it's about us as a group. It's not just about me, it's not just about them, it's about us as a community, a staff community, a student community, a wider community working together for the same goal, which is to create individual students who grow up into positive people that can have a positive contribution to our society. So if we can do that, even a little bit in the time we're here at school, then we've done our job.
Okay, welcome aboard, everyone. Fabulous to have you here. I hope that worked. I haven't done that before, where I've shared a video as a starting point. I'm told that it's a new feature of Zoom. So if you're feeling like you can do the thing of put something in the chat box to let me know that I didn't just blow things up, that would be fabulous, and would give me a little affirmation that my pedagogies for running an online session with you is somewhere near the mark. I do want to also acknowledge that pedagogy of starting with a video in a session like this isn't usual. In fact, the pedagogy, I'm told that when you run an online session, particularly if you run an online session that has any sort of endpoint associated with us wanting to collaborate with you, that I'm supposed to show you the example later. But the truth is that I've got a three-step plan in mind for this webinar today. And I want to be respectful of where you might find yourself. We've had 250 people, 250 school leaders from all around the country who have jumped on today to register for this webinar today, which tells me that there's some pain around this topic out there, and I want to be respectful of that by not being trivial. I actually got people who told me that the video worked, so that's really fabulous. I'll take that. And yeah, we can make them available to you, Mark, no problem. It's really important to me that I show that respect, and so what I've tried to do is build a three-step intention for this webinar today, and step one's hope. I get that when things are challenging and when things are tricky, and I get also that hope's a rather ethereal thing for you to embrace at a time when you're possibly feeling tired and a little worn out, a little exasperated, perhaps even desperate enough to carve out an hour of your time to learn a little more about a different way of tackling leading whole school behaviour. But I do want you to have that hope. I do want you to know that there are secondary and there are primary schools out there who are tackling this in such a way that all three stakeholder groups in their school, their staff, their students, and their parent and carer community, are thriving and collaborating. I spoke to a principal of one of our partner schools just a couple of weeks ago, and I must admit though there's a theme when I do speak to school leaders at the moment about how you're going. Pretty tired, pretty run down. And this school principal said, look, I'm trying to resist the whole notion of just saying that because I feel like I'm supposed to, and that's the way that a lot of people are feeling at the moment. But she said, this is the best term 4 we've had in ages. And not just because of the pandemic. She was talking about going back. She said she can't remember one in the last 8 to 10 years that's been this collegiate, this smooth, and good on her. I want that for you. I want that for your school. And to do that, we need to begin with the notion chosen that this can be better. Your current reality does not need to be your future reality, with the acceptance that comes with that if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. So let's be prepared to do something different, which leads me to my second piece here, which is I want to do context. So I want to take you a little bit back in history. I want to do a little bit of work about moving you to see how we got in this place, how we ended up here with, for a lot of people who are telling me that we've got a crisis around student behaviour on our hands in Australian schools. I want to show you how that happened and give you the opportunity to kind of put your school within that context. And then I want to do the thing which is probably your motivator for coming here. I want to get to strategy. So that's quite important for me, is that you leave with something today that you can do immediately. And I want you to know that there'll be two paths on that straight up. There'll be the path that you'll be able to go and do something immediately in your school, and then there'll be the path that you'll have to do something immediately in your school with us. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what that might look like at the end of the webinar. I do want to remind you that this is a webinar. There can sometimes be the temptation that it feels a little bit like we're in educational Netflix, and I'll tell you what, just to give you a recommendation, this isn't Netflix, but if you haven't watched a movie on Amazon Prime, a series on Amazon Prime called The Bear, go and get it. That's your holiday reading. If you get holiday watching, if you get nothing else from today, go and watch that. It's an absolute ripper. But this isn't Amazon Prime or Netflix, which means I just wanted to remind you that you got the opportunity to interact. And while with so many people coming along to the session today, I won't have the chance to kind of stop and answer every question in great detail. If you are looking to try and put some of the thinking and advice that I'm providing today in the context of your school, and you want to make a comment in the chat box, go bananas. I'm probably not going to do the thing usually that I do in a webinar where I say that you can put your hand up. I'll let you sit back on that one, but the chat box, if not the Q&A, I have to admit I've got the chat box open. I don't have the Q&A open. I sort of have to remind myself to go and have a look. Chat disabled at your end, but video radio. So I'm going to have to remember that I'm going to make sure I pay attention to the Q&A if the chat box isn't working for you. In fact, what I'm going to try and do, just to prove that this is live action, I'll close the chat box myself and see if I can keep the Q&A open and see if that works. So I do want to just encourage you, I suppose, that there is an opportunity for you around interaction today and to contextualise some of what I'm going to do. Okay, so hope established, I hope. And then what I want to do is to talk to you a little bit about history. Okay, and to take you back into maybe even the days that you and I were at school, if you're of my vintage, maybe even before that. And our classrooms tended to look a little like this. And what we had in place was a system of control, a system that was underpinned by authority. And while I do, absolutely, I want to be really clear about this, I do want our teachers today to feel a level of authority in the classroom. I want them to achieve it in an authoritative rather than authoritarian way. And what you can see in the picture that's on the screen at the moment is a teacher in an authoritarian position. Now, it's not someone who's doing it in a particularly unkind way. If you sort of lean in and squint, you might be able to see that the teacher, looks like a reasonably kind and smiling fellow. Okay, but this is an authoritarian position. And back in the old days, we could sustain it. We could live with the mismatch between a judicial way of improving behaviour in the school and a learning system. And what I mean by that is that when we use a judicial approach in a learning system, we don't have the same thing. What we want is for our schools to be places where young people learn to improve their behaviour, not where control, power and authoritarianism catches them not living up to a standard. Okay, now we could live with this because of simplicity, of some simplicities. Okay, one of the simplicities was around the role of the teacher. There was certainly a level of autonomy to stop and to investigate what had gone on at lunchtime. You had time to supervise at a higher level. You had time to follow through if you needed to. And there was also a truth about the simplicity of the young people that showed up every day. They often came from nuclear families where one parent was at home and it was instilling a moral code. And this is absolutely no slight on the modern family. But they were often less neurodiverse, came with less physical and intellectual challenges. They came with less trauma. And partly that was because anybody that did show up like that got excluded. Not exactly the kind of system we want, is it? So while the system for our schooling and the way that we did classrooms and the way that we did inclusive education changed over time, it tended to be that our system for improving behaviour in schools didn't. Okay, we just kept trying harder at this system. We put higher penalties in place. We put more people on yard duty. We tried to catch people doing the wrong thing as a way of kind of encouraging them to do the right thing. And I get it. I get that that's why we maybe went down that track. Okay. But as the conditions got harder and harder and harder, the system got harder and harder and harder to deploy. And we started to find people, and we are starting to find people who can't keep up, who are telling us that workload of being a teacher is really tough. And I get that some of that's associated with administrative compliances, but not all of it. You know, in fact, what we're finding is that as we move from ancient history into kind of today, this what I call the acceleration era, and I'll explain that in just a moment. What we're finding is that we have too many people whose workload and whose stress levels are being impacted so negatively by teaching that they're leaving. And what we know about the stresses and the research that's been done by this, there was some really fabulous work that was done by a researcher called Louisa Hebhardt in South Australia. And she looked at what is it that's stressing our teachers quite a few years ago, but it's also been looked at both through the pandemic and in whatever this kind of semi-post-pandemic period is that we're in at the moment. And the order of the things that is stressing our teachers hasn't changed. In fact, what the pandemic has done is poked a bruise in the challenges that already existed before that. The top three of those challenges were, number one, student behaviour. And the thing that was keeping our teachers awake at night was not necessarily the behaviour that happened that day, but the absence of a plan for it to be any better tomorrow. Because what they were realising was that the plan that had been run since that teacher in black and white had been running it, and since we started to form for ourselves a picture in our heads as students ourselves many, many years ago about what teachers do when they're under pressure, what teachers should do in the classroom, and it is usually stand at the class front of the room in an authoritarian position. It is usually try to catch kids doing the wrong thing. And it is usually follow through with some sort of consequence as a means of deterring that behaviour from happening again. What they were finding is they just couldn't keep up. That system was becoming unsustainable. And the issues we've got around young people coming back now and the way that they're presenting in our schools at the moment have quickly taken that system from being just bearable towards making it unsustainable, in fact, inoperable at this very point in time. Our teachers know, and the top three, as I said, student behaviour, workload, some of that associated with student behaviour, and then number three is parents. The idea that we're in conflict, that we disagree about the way that schools should approach things like improving conduct, behaviour, engagement, and culture, is pushing people to a breaking point at an alarmingly accelerated rate. So the time to focus on culture, the time to focus on improving student behaviour has passed. What's the right day for you to start to address this in a completely different way? Yesterday. Okay, in the absence of yesterday, let's start today. So to give you an idea of where we found ourselves in terms of pandemic, I think what we did have kind of in the old days was what I would call a sweet spot. There's dodgy stuff, you know, down the bottom of the bell curve that students are doing, that we're doing, that when we're down at the bottom of this graph, we're kind of practicing poorly and the kids are behaving poorly. I get that. But I think that previously we're in that green window, we had, like I said, I think it's what I refer to as being a sweet spot where there was a bit of no man's land about it, where we were deploying a bit of this judicial stuff. Occasionally we might get a bit restorative. We might use a behaviour program a little bit here and there. We might teach them about respect on a Wednesday afternoon, even though a lot of our teachers did teach the respect mini lesson on Wednesday afternoon, then have to give a really good mark to a kid who did an amazing respect poster, and then had to watch the kid go out into the yard and hit someone over the head with a rolled up respect poster. Yeah, I think a lot of us have had that experience. So we were a bit hit and miss, but mostly we were able to tolerate it. We could move forward from there. We could show up again the following day. And what has resulted through the pandemic is that the first shift we noticed was that the students changed. And so what we had on our hands was a situation where actually for many schools, there was a little honeymoon. The kids came back from things like remote learning and everyone went, oh, everyone's just so happy to see each other. And then the honeymoon ended quickly. And what a lot of teachers reported to me was that they were seeing kids particularly in competition and in comparison. Now, I'm a believer that there are two keys to misery in life. One is comparison. Whenever we're comparing ourselves to another, even you can imagine as educators or school leaders, when we compare ourselves to another educator or school leader, we tend to find ourselves feeling pretty miserable about ourselves. And that's no good. And then unreasonable expectations. These kids were impacted, and we want them to go back to the good old days to spy. And what we found them was in competing with each other for social hierarchy again. Some teachers told me it's like Lord of the Flies out there. They're all just kind of trying pecking order the whole time. And we're trying to deal, particularly after recesses and lunches, with the mess of this social hierarchy battle that seems to be going on. And it's tough. And the truth about competition is that we don't bring the best of ourselves in competition. So we're hopeless in comparison, we're miserable, but when we're competing as well, you know, we often bring behaviours that aren't becoming of us. I know that myself, I'm a collaborative guy. Yeah, and I think that's evident to people who work with me in schools. But put me in a competitive environment. My sport of choice, for instance, is a cricket field, and I will say things to a nervous 16-year-old batsman that I would never, ever say to a 16-year-old in a classroom. It brings the worst of me. And a lot of teachers are telling us that as a result of kids not being able to be the number one on the pecking order, that the feeling that they're seeing and the feeling that they're seeing them respond poorly to is shame. School has become a place where I don't succeed socially and where I'm not succeeding academically because I'm too busy comparing and competing. And what a lot of teachers and educators are telling me is the type of language that they're hearing from these kids in shame and busy with competing and comparing is language like, I don't have to do what you tell me to do. You can't make me. I'm not doing it. It's defiant kind of language. And it's aggressive language that comes with that when we try to push really hard on that, where we try to sustain that standard. And they're using that language because the motivator of making progress socially and academically in the classroom, in the school environment, has disappeared. And then we had to respond. We had to come up when we noticed that the honeymoon was over and the kids are different. There's something wrong here. Our usual strategies are not tolerable at the moment. There's no sweet spot to be found at the moment. What did we do? We tended to slip in the opposite direction. And what we looked for was systems of control. We looked to up the ante on punishment. We looked to get really focused on outcomes and whether things were perfect or not, whether the strategies we used worked or not. And we forgot that none of the strategies that we used to use worked all of the time with all of the kids. We had problems back then as well. We had kids that we struggled to make breakthroughs with. We had classes who deteriorated across the year. We had all sorts of issues because we were using a system that was mismatched to our purpose. It wasn't a learning system, it was a judicial system. So we were always battling a little bit with that. And we found ourselves in a situation where we were so obsessed with outcomes that we were beating ourselves up. Teachers are getting out to the car going, this isn't working. This is a really hard day. I suck at this. This is awful. And as a result of our feeling that we're not making progress, our feeling that we're not collaborating, our feeling that we're not on the same page, our feeling that you approach it a certain way and I approach it a different way, and I'm comparing myself to you based on whether it worked or not in that moment, has resulted in teachers exasperatedly saying things like, I don't have to put up with this. As school leaders, you may have heard it manifest in the language of, we need to stamp this out. We need to crack down on this. I didn't sign up for this. I need to be shown respect. And there's a lot of I statements going on here. And as we're finding teachers defaulting across to strategies of whack-a-mole, where they're trying to put out all these little spot fires for all these little competitive and comparative devils that are wandering into their classrooms every single day, they're exhausted. What happened to us was the kids went in one direction and we went in the other. And as a result, there is increasing tension. There is increasing adversarial mood in our schools. There's an increasing environment of competition where either we win or they win. And we haven't actually noticed that there is stuff in the sweet spot that allows us to get back into a win-win type way of working. And most teachers, most school leaders will tell you that's what I would like. That's what I would like. I would like an environment that feels like we're working on something together, where we share the effort, where we share the ethic, where we share the ambition. I work with a fabulous teacher in one of our partner schools who says that she thinks the key to young people overcoming, to schools and communities of schools overcoming the impact of the last 2 or 3 years, is for every class as much as possible to feel like a group project. Because what we're finding is that when we adopt the position of that teacher in the ancient history slide, standing at the front of the room, playing whack-a-mole, trying to use control, trying to get the best outcome, and forgetting what great collaborative process looks like, then we become miserable ourselves. And people are leaving as a result of it. So that's kind of how we find ourselves here. So what is in the sweet spot? Or, you know what could be in the new sweet spot? What could it be if we go back and say, actually, you know what, there was a mismatch beforehand, and that's why under pressure, there's been a tipping point, there's been a snapping point. What's the really good practice? What's the really good process that we could start to lean back into? And we think that it's a really simple model. We think that it's a simple, explicit practice framework for building culture, for building a culture where young people, with teachers and with parents have kind of had their environment tilted in favour of them being successful. And then we just get comfortable with the idea that some people won't be successful every single day. Our work is not about perfection. Our work is not about achieving some sort of outcome or getting a certain amount of people past a certain threshold. Our work is around creating an environment that gives most people the chance to. And then we've got to sit back and let the outcomes take care of themselves. One of the things that we've made mistakes around when looking at what's in the sweet spot is trying to do things like explicitly teach, bring in elements of control through, to be really honest, the nicest possible means, but still elements of control. We've built behaviour matrices. We've built flowcharts about what we're going to do. We've defined behaviours as being level 1, level 2, level 3. We've defined that felt a bit negative. So what we did was we started to define our values. That'll be good. People will start to live up to our values, won't they? We'll formalise that. We'll spend big days of PD working out what our values are, and we'll work out it from our stakeholders what they want those things to be. And all of that is worthy ambition, but it doesn't change the way that the most influential people in your school behave and contribute practice. The most influential stakeholder group in your school is your staff. And if we don't change the little things, then we can't expect that teaching kids about respect, because it's our school value, is going to make them respectful. And in fact, I think we could do well to cop a little bit of poor tasting medicine around the notion that our values are doing anything. The most common value in Australia is, of course, respect. Whenever I ask a room full of Australian teachers or school leaders, do you think we have a challenge on our hands with respect in Australian schools? They all put their hands up. It's not working. It's not working. And when I make the medicine taste really bad by letting you know that the first organisations who decided that they needed to let us know what their values were Big Oil and Big Tobacco, you might start to question why they did it. It's not because they had a behavioural or a conduct change ambition in mind. They wanted to trick us that their place was a more respectful, more caring, more empathic, more responsible organisation than the one down the road. And any one of our schools putting respect up as a school value and thinking that it makes their environment more respectful than a school a few kilometres away is kidding themselves. And we need to get clear that it is a low-level behavioural shift that is required from our educators if we want to get the culture that is tilted in the favour of everyone succeeding. It requires shifts in language, it requires shifts in conduct, and it requires shifts in mindset. And if we do this, if we can make this mental decision that we are going to work differently, that we are not going to follow the same plane when it comes to student behaviour improvement, we're not going to implement another program. We're going to acknowledge that none of the behaviour programs that were being implemented 8 years ago are being implemented in Australian schools today. Why? Because you can only get a short-term spike out of a program. You can only deprogram certain behaviours out of young people so far. But if we don't create an environment where opportunities like big character traits like respect and empathy and honesty and responsibility and kindness are encouraged at a behavioural level by the people who are influential in that culture, then we can expect that we are going to get the benefits of those programs waning and disappearing, and you'll be implementing another one in no time. So what do you do? What do you change? How do you change? Let's start with the language piece. All right, we talk to 3 areas that you can be changed in your school immediately in terms of the way that we speak that have a significant impact. So what we're not talking here is high investment, low return. And this is the investment that schools make when they decide that they're going to book a program, is we're going to put a lot of investment in both budget, time, effort, resource, okay? And for a lot of schools, the notion of having, in a lot of different areas, implemented a program, spent a lot of time on effort on something really big and gotten a little return is something that resonates. We need to flip that mentality. And we do it first with language by saying what we want to do is invest small amounts, tiny little things that have the potential for a really big impact. I mentioned 3 things that we do in the language sphere. Number 1 is we talk about affective language. You notice that I'm emphasize the A, not the E. We talk about affective language. Affective language is essentially, and this is not complicated, saying what you're already going to say, but putting in a feelings word. That's it. It's the whole thing. And if you can encourage people in your school to embrace the fact that that takes no extra time and effort, that if you see a young person, I don't know, bump into someone a little bit when they go to line up to come in after lunchtime, then you are able to say to that person, disappoints me to see you do that, go to the back. Rather than, hey, you don't push in this school, go to the back. You'll notice that both sentences took roughly the same amount of time. But if I were in the room with you, I'd ask you on the count of 3 to tell me what's the word you heard me say the loudest in both sentences. And you would most likely tell me that the word you heard was disappointed. There's a couple of reasons that you heard the word disappointed the most. And the chief reason, well, there's a couple of benefits that you get from speaking that way. The chief reason that you heard that word so loudly is because it activated both the neocortex of your brain, the thinking part of your brain, where your vocab is stored, and your limbic system, which is your old reptilian brain. It's where all your emotions are stored. You activated both. And as a result, that word was heard, it was noticed, and it was processed. So more of the brain got activated when you used that language. And what did that do in that moment? It slightly tilted the odds in the favour of that young person going, oh, fair enough, and walking to the back of the line. It's no guarantee, I get it. But you will need to start to use that language to get a better response from people, to get a better hit rate in them following your instructions. The second thing you did is far more powerful, and that is that you provided that young person with information, and that's information that they can use in the future. When you have been raised, and when you are being raised in an environment that reminds you with outrageous and monotonous regularity that your conduct, both of a positive and negative nature. So when you see a kid line up the right way, just I'm so impressed to see that. That's respect. You provided that kid with information as well that they can use to do what we refer to as being higher order thinking later on, which means they might actually think before they act. Here's something that I think is going on in a lot of Australian schools, and I think that many of you are experiencing at the moment. I think you're experiencing a narrow gap in young people between impulse and action. So I think what we're finding is that the impulse to elbow a kid as you jump into line comes along, elbow. The impulse to swear at a teacher comes along, swear at the teacher. The impulse to chuck an apple across the basketball court, apple's gone. There's no gap. But if you are raised in an environment that reminds you that that kind of behaviour has an impact on other people, then you might have a moment. And this isn't just about you. It's about culture, it's about environment, it's about the outrageous number of opportunities that we have in a daily environment. Most teachers tell me that if they were the masters of this affective language, that they would have the opportunity to, that they probably have a couple hundred a day, positive and negative. Delighted, impressed, frustrated, rapt, all of those kind of affective words, language of feelings, that they'd have the opportunity to weave it in. And if you've caught 50, in a small school, let's say 40 people, that's 2,000. That's 2,000 occurrences every single day, not just between you and the student that was spoken to or a staff member and the student was spoken to, but for everybody who heard it. It's 10,000 a week. It's 100,000 a term. It's 400,000 a year. That's cultural. And we have to be really rational about asking ourselves occasionally, what's more likely to build respect? What's more likely to build self-regulation in a young person? 400,000 reminders in the environment that they walk into 200 times a year, or a mini lesson on a Wednesday afternoon about respect? I think it's pretty obvious. And what happens if you create that environment where kids start to build that emotional intelligence is that the impulse and action gap begins to widen. And what can fit in that gap? A thought. A thought. You'll have to be watching closely, but on yard duty, you can, just notice that there's a kid over there that's got the apple in their hand, and I can see it come along, and that it's not profound. It's not as exciting as having taught them the respect mini lesson, but you'll see a young person with the apple in their hand and have a moment where you can register it in their eyes, in their brain. What's going on is a thought along the lines of, nah, probably shouldn't. And they go and put the apple in the bin. And you have now found an opportunity to thank and congratulate young people. Another teacher in one of our partner schools says that she thinks another key to us being able to make progress from a really difficult point in education and in schools at the moment is for teachers to get obsessed with seizing the opportunity to thank and congratulate young people for doing the right thing. Create the conditions where they might seems like a good idea. Another part of the language piece, you can take that back to your school straight away. You can get that going. Another part of the language puzzle that we encourage schools to work on is what we call stored responses. So situations where we get ourselves a little bit limbic, a little emotional. And in those moments, we tend to say really strange things. I know I do. If I'm in an emotional argument with someone I love, I will say really odd, even verging on hurtful things to that person. I love them. What am I doing? What am I saying that for? I'm saying it because I've lost access to my thinking part of my brain, because as human beings, we tend to be one or the other. We tend to be thinking or feeling. We're not very good at doing both at the same time. The overlap between thinking and feeling is really narrow for us. And so in the classroom, there are many, many circumstances that have the potential to get you limbic, to get you emotional. And we talk about it in our model. We talk about what is it that gets you off track and gets you saying the wrong thing. For me, it's one of the things that gets me is students interrupting and calling out. I find that rude. I find that a struggle. I know it happens. I know, and I know that it's inevitable that I'm going to be faced with that, but it just annoys me. And I will say strange things to a kid that keeps calling out, like, how many times do I have to tell you? As though there's an answer to that question. So what I've done is I've decided in advance of the moment, and I've stored it. It's a stored response in my neocortex. When that emotional moment comes, I don't need to create what I'm going to say because I'll get it wrong. And what I do is the advice that I gave a teacher in one of our partner schools, a secondary school recently, and he was telling me that calling out was a big problem in his class. It's okay. And so the plan was for me to watch his class for 30 minutes and then provide him some feedback. And I said, okay. And so I said, what are we dealing with here? He said, it's calling out. It's driving me crazy. They won't stop. It's fair enough. And he taught for 30 minutes and he was right. He was right. That there was a lot of calling out. And at the end of the 30 minutes, I sat with him. I said, what do you reckon is the primary motivator for students calling out? He said, it's probably attention seeking. I said, you might be right. It's something like that, isn't it? I said, how many times did you provide attention, do you think, in that 30-minute lesson to a young person who was craving attention and seeking it? And he went, I'm a bit of a sucker for it, aren't I? And I said, maybe. And he said, I think I probably did it maybe 7 or 8 times. And I said, no. He said, 10. And I said, 32. He was going at better than 1 a minute at responding either positively or negatively, but giving attention to that kid. And he asked me an incredibly valid question. What do I do then? What do I do? I said, here's what I do, because I'm annoyed by the same thing. I'll give half a second of eye contact, not enough reward for all the effort that they're going to of attention to any student who's calling out. And I say, disappoints me to hear call out. I can't listen to you, but I can listen to you. It's because of the way you're sitting right now. Is there anything you'd like me to clarify? And this is totally freaking that kid out. But it's not for that kid. It's for this kid. The kid on this side that's calling out. We want them to get less reward than the effort they've gone to. And he said, okay. I said, what do I do now? He said, what do I do the second time? I said, nothing. It's the same thing over and over again. And I could see the skepticism in his eyes. But he went off to teach for the rest of the day. I visited some other teachers and helped them out. This is part of our partnership approach where we run an in-school support day where we don't just run the training, we come and help implement. I went off and did that. At the end of the day, we had a debrief in the library and I watched this teacher walk in, eyeball me and walk straight at me. Oh, I think I might have broken him. As he got to me, he hugged me. And I looked down, and because I'm about 6'4" and he's about 5'8", and he's got his head on my chest. I said, what's going on? And he said, 9B are putting their hands up. 9B putting their hands up. And after I sort of pushed him off my chest, I said, so you used the strategy? He said, yeah, it's awesome. I said, okay, so can I ask first, did it get rid of the calling out in your class? And he said, well, no. I said, can you give me an idea of the improvement rate? And he said about 70, reckons 70 or 80%. And he'll take it. In an outcomes obsessed environment, we start talking about, yeah, but what about the other 20? Yeah, but what about the kid who hasn't? Can we just be really happy? Is it possible that we could be really happy that our response that costs almost nothing has improved something that is driving someone completely bonkers by about 70 or 80%, and worry about what the next strategy might be after that? Can we lean into the good process? Can we lean into effective statements in your school? Can we lean into stored responses? Can we lean into stakeholder protection, which is another bit of language, which is essentially saying we don't speak poorly of each other. We don't call each other names. We don't bag each other out. Staff, students, or parents and carers in our school gate, within the confines of our school gates. If we've got something negative to say about someone, we've made a choice to say it to the dog, because the dog doesn't care if that person comes back into their life. But if we bag out 9B in the staff room, then the problem is that there are a bunch of teachers that have to go and see 9B and their approach is already coloured. That's probably a bigger topic for another day. The other thing that we do if you look at our pedagogical model here, is that we talk a lot about conduct. And that's chiefly about tackling the imperative of how we work with young people in two key ways. Number one, it's around the way we approach conflict and wrongdoing. That black and white teacher I showed you before used a very simple methodology, which was what happened. And to find out what happened, that teacher needs to go to a lot of effort. They have to launch what I call educational CSI. They have to call witnesses. They need a full forensic brief on what happened, because the aim of that model, that system, is to determine blame. And I don't know about you, I've found myself from time to time trying to determine that blame numerically. Maybe it's 80% that kid, 20% that kid, because what I need to do with that is to apply a punishment or a consequence. In a sound restorative model, we reject the notion that a heavily past-based system that actually takes you back into history from the moment of instance, so far sometimes that we're not even close to doing something productive about it, but a system that says let's move quickly and simply from past to present to future in a time-effective way is a more efficient way to deal with that situation. We have an artifact that's called P3, F3, which is often deployed in upper primary areas of primary schools and definitely across our secondary partners to deal with group conflict. Because I don't know about you, but as a school leader, if a group of Year 8 students come to me and say, we have a friendship group problem, it's an hour of my life that I never get back. And what we've trained many of these students to do, often even without us, is to talk about the past for 3 minutes, just get a rough gist of what happened rather than a full forensic brief, to talk about the present for 3 minutes. How's this impacting people? How are people here feeling? And then to talk about the future for 3 minutes, which is effectively create their own list of things they're going to do that fix the problem, that fix the harm, because that's the centre of working restoratively. As we talk about harm and relationships, not blame and punishment. And what we find is that when they actually do those actions, we get to thank and congratulate them, and they get to walk away without the shame of wrongdoing hanging around their necks and increasing the likelihood that their next decision will be a poor one. The other bit of the conduct piece that we talk about is around circle architecture. Our classrooms don't need to look like that classroom that I showed in the black and white photo. Our classrooms can embrace the notion that we can be authoritative and we can do a lot of our instruction, a lot of our checking in, a lot of our checking out, a lot of our learning, a lot of our preparing, a lot of our responding by just getting together in a rough circle and seeing if we can work on this together. If we're going to say that each class needs to feel a little like a group project, it needs to look like it. It needs to provide a context for young people that says group to them rather than authoritarian figure trying to drag you kicking and screaming through their learning, through the curriculum. I spoke to a teacher not so long ago, a secondary teacher again in one of our partner schools, who has embraced circle architecture to the point where she's pushed all the tables in her year 8, 9, 10 and 11 humanities and English classes all the way to the edge of the room. When the students come in, they actually face a wall. They're sitting at a chair at a table facing a wall, which doesn't seem particularly inclusive, doesn't it? Until she sits on a chair at the front of the room and says, turn your chair around, everyone. Instant circle. Instant circle. She's able to provide a short bit of instruction and then say, turn your chairs around. And what do you know, when the students need to work individually, they actually have a wall in front of them and only one student either side. Distractions are low, they're getting more done. She actually told me there was an unintended benefit of working this way with this architecture. And it was, she can see what's on their laptops. I asked this teacher after she'd been doing it for a while, how it felt to teach by adopting circle architecture. And she said that she felt guilty. So what do you mean? What's going on there? And she said, I've never run lessons where the students, where I have sat so much, where I have spoken so little, and where the students have got so much done. It is time not to be a teacher dancing at the front of the room like some trained seal with the ambition of motivating our young people to do something, when the truth is they're sitting there like this, not listening. We need to increase the odds that they need to listen. We need to increase the activation level in our young people. We need to increase and access them to the thrill of making progress themselves, not waiting to judge a teacher on whether they're any good at the front of the room or not. And circle architecture, done artfully, provides teachers with the opportunity to go home each day without a sore throat and without a headache. Because boy, it's hard to stand at the front of the room and put on a show for kids who'd rather be at home on an Xbox at the moment. As part of the mindset we take. We take clear mindsets around detaching ourselves from outcome. We take clear mindsets around where punishments and consequences are actually appropriate in a sound restorative model, and allow teachers to move ahead by deploying them consistently and in a way that doesn't destroy the relationship that they desperately need to leverage for performance and risk in the future. And we talk a lot to our teachers about how it is that they can build a model that genuinely starts to deter some of these behaviours from happening. And what we know we can't do is deter these behaviours from happening through punishment and through surveillance. But what we can do is start the work of building an environment where if a young person in your school shows up in the morning and declares to you that they've had a stinker, I've had a big fight with mum, I'm upset, I didn't get any breakfast, and where you go, hang on, you haven't had anything to eat or drink? Okay, I'm going to duck up to the canteen and grab you a quick sandwich, and if you walk into the staff room here, you'll see that there's a bottle of orange juice left on the counter. Just pour yourself a glass and I'll be back in a second. What we need to build is an environment where if that young person walks into an environment where there's nobody watching them, no surveillance, and pours a glass of orange juice but spills it on the counter, knowing that they have two choices, knowing that that young person can bolt. Would a young person in your school not bolt but clean it up? We need to make our schools places that are not games for dodging consequences, because what we do is we encourage our young people to game that system and to get better at lying. And if we don't want young people who are constantly trying to avoid our glare and avoid our system, who are kind of the people who I find on freeways, who are what I call bridge breakers, people who slow down for the bridges because that's where the speed cameras are, but then fly past you at 120 kilometres between the bridges, you know. If we don't want to raise those kinds of people, and we want to raise the kinds of young people who would just clean up the glass, pour themselves another, and tell the teacher, I spilt the glass, but I cleaned it up, when they get back, so that that teacher can ruffle their hair and say, good one, appreciate you doing that, thank and congratulate, then we need to get clear about the language and the conduct that would support that kind of growth. And it's ridiculously possible. So I absolutely hope that regardless of what you do as a result of today, that you go back to your school and do something about it, because there's a cost of not doing it. And the cost is that you'll end up a Shutterstock photo that looks eerily like Sandra Bullock staring out a window, because what you will have done is continue to deploy a system that over the last 2-3 years has become thoroughly unsustainable in your school. You will continue to keep yourself behind the game that states like New South Wales and Queensland have already taken with their behaviour strategy. And I get that it's an inch forward. I get that there's some espoused restorative type intention in the new behaviour strategy for New South Wales. And I get also that some of what's being asked of teachers after that is to go wildly nuts on comprehensive paperwork. The game here is not to get comprehensive, but to get efficient. And what we need to do is to deploy language, conduct, and mindsets in schools that keep your teachers below what I've called the paperwork threshold. We don't want your staff having to go and fill out databases and forms every single time something goes wrong in the school. We want them to get busy creating an environment where they don't have to as much. Not as much gets above the line of the paperwork threshold. That's got to be our ambition. And if you continue at this point to say, yeah, that all sounds good in theory, but it's Johnny, but the parents might get up and upset about it, but I've got a few rusted on recalcitrant teachers who aren't going to do it, then what you are saying is that you're going to wait for your culture to come good. You're going to wait for your stakeholders to contribute more positively to your culture before you attend to it. And what that means is that we are prepared to be victims. We are prepared to be victims of a culture of our working culture being dictated by the emotions of the people who walk into it, the backgrounds of the people that walk into it, the challenges of the people that walk into it, rather than seizing the cultural leadership mantle of saying, no, I know what a good learning culture feels like. I know what a good learning culture sounds like. I know what a good learning culture looks like. And we are going to develop that so that as people come in with trauma and with difficulty and challenge and all sorts of problems that they have to deal with, that this becomes a place where that gets better. I want that for your school. Culture counts now. What's the goal here? What's the goal is something that we have to start to ask ourselves. And I spoke recently to a teacher who said, the goal is for me to not get sworn at. I said, well, I can do that in a preventative system, in a judicial system, just stay home. They sort of looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I said, no, well, you won't get sworn at if you stay home. You know, that's easy. I said, what do you really want? So just said, I want this kid to learn how to speak respectfully to people. Let's get busy on that. Let's get busy on that. If the notion of getting busy on that appeals, and if further the notion of being able to be supported in doing that for your school appeals, then there's a couple of things you can do. And I'm going to keep it really simple for you. Number one is that if you would like to go to the Real Schools website, just type into the browser that you're sitting at now, realschools.com.au. You will see a tab there for books, and you will find a tab for a book called, let's get it in screen, Restoring Teaching. And Restoring Teaching is I wrote it, should admit that, shouldn't I? And it's essentially the list of strategies, and I should talk it up more than that, I know, but it's the list of strategies and language and conduct that you can deploy in your school and get you going with that. And it's free. It's free to every Australian educator. You pay only postage and handling to get it to you. And if you would like multiple copies for your school, then you should send an email to info@realschools.com.au and let our amazing admin team know how many copies you need for your school to get the ball rolling. It's a good holiday read. It's full of story. It's written very in a very granular, down to earth, practical kind of fashion. It ain't your usual edu read, and I guess today's webinar might give you a hint of that. And the other thing we can do is work with your school across a 3-year journey to implement this by providing you with a critical friend who has been not only a successful teacher, but also a successful school principal. That's who our expert facilitator team are at Real Schools. We're fussy. They've got to be people who've led it from the classroom and from the big chair, and they know how to do the training. They know how to model it in classrooms. They know how to engage parents. They know how to build the action plans. They know how to build the front-facing documentation that provides people with a reduced anxiety and a higher level of confidence in the school. They know how to measure their improvement. They know how to resource it. They know how to be a genuine critical friend to your school. Now, if that sounds like something that you wouldn't mind, if your school being the next video we make, like Mountain View High School and like Richmond Primary School that you watched at the start of this webinar, then I reckon I've given you enough time to get your phone out. I know you got it nearby, and to use the QR code that you can see on the screen right now to let my wonderful exec assistant Chris know that we need a chat. This is the time, not because it's November and it's the middle of term 4 and you're planning for next year, but because the time to focus on your culture has already passed. It was yesterday. In the absence of yesterday, run with today. Thank you. I say thank you not just for your attention and your attendance today, but I thank you for doing what I write at the bottom of my Home Truths email every Friday, which is for fighting the good fight. We're losing a lot of people at the moment, and that you're still here is something that I'm incredibly grateful for. I'm really passionate about transforming schools in Australia, and I want to do it not only for the students, but so really wonderful people like you stick around a little bit longer. I know that the last 2 or 3 years in so many schools have been incredibly challenging, and I honour that you are on the other side of that and continuing to have a crack, continuing to try and learn for 57 minutes today how you could do it even better. You're awesome. Keep up the great work. I'm going to let you go there, but I will go slow. So if you want to leave, then hooroo, have a great day. But if you wanted to type something in the Q&A, then I will have a quick look whether it's something that I can answer straight away or not. I will. Just Sam, yes, we're in every state and territory. So we're not ignoring one, particularly South Australia. So yes, that's available. Yes, go and get the book, Brad. Yeah. Yes, the book's available freely, Sam. So you can provide it to parents. They can have a look at what we're up to. If you've just started with the process and you're in a partner school, then giving them the login to the member section is something that they also tend to really respect and value as well, that they can go and have a look at the secret teacher business. So that's useful. All right, I think we've got people starting to file their way out of the room. I'll give people just a little longer. Yes, so Marg's asking, notice that the webinar is recorded and it will be provided. We were very mindful that for a lot of our states and territories, it's the middle of the day, and that not everyone would be able to attend at this time. So people who came, people who didn't come will also get a recording of the webinar. It'll be sent to you as a private YouTube link, so it's not something that you'll be able to search for, but you'll have that link and you'll be able to access the recording again. Thank you to the people that are saying complimentary things. I really appreciate it. All right, folks, I'm going to let you go. Enjoy. Hope to talk to you soon.